is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to The World Today, live from CGTN in London. I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Fears of a third wave in Europe. France and Poland go back into lockdown as the vaccine row intensifies. Germany could be next to impose more restrictions after warning the disease is growing exponentially across the country. And Chinese and US officials leave Alaska after the first major summit of the Biden White House. A third wave in Europe and a growing battle over vaccines. France, Poland and Ukraine have started new lockdowns, with 20 European nations reporting a rise in positive tests. AstraZeneca vaccinations are resuming in several countries after a pause over safety concerns. But EU leaders are threatening to block exports of the jabs amid a row over supplies. The UK government, meanwhile, says half the country's adult population has now been vaccinated. But there are concerns here too over the impact on summer travel and the spread of new variants. Lots to talk about with my colleague Yolo Abdavid, who's here with me in the studio. So, Yolo, how quickly is the situation deteriorating in European countries?
It is in several countries. You've listed some of them, but also Ukraine and Italy. But in France and Poland especially, we are seeing as they are turning towards lockdowns. In France, it started at midnight overnight, and because of a 35,000 increase in cases in the 24-hour period, in the last 24-hour period, this is why there's just an explosion of cases in France. And possibly between 5 and 10% of them are from the variant of COVID thought to have originated from South Africa. That's why there is a lot of concern. So almost a third of the French population will be under some kind of lockdown for the next month, and which is why so many people have tried to leave. For instance, Paris, there were lots of movement on rail and roads overnight, and it's not seen as a tougher lockdown as before, but still, it'll be tough enough. And the same in Poland, a 3-week lockdown in Poland. Most of the non-essential businesses have to close, and the fear in Poland is the impact on the hospitals and how many people who are suffering from COVID-19 and actually in hospital on ventilators already. So that's how serious it is at the moment.
And could there be a potential impact on the UK, despite it being ahead in its vaccination programme?
Well, it is ahead, and obviously quite pleasing for the UK government in this sense that so many people, half the adults, have already been vaccinated in the UK. That's 26.25 million people, so they're chuffed about that. But the danger is that as the lockdown is less restrictive here and is being eased in April, May, possibly June, then that means that more and more people will be looking to travel. They'll want their summer holidays, wherever that might be on the continent. And the danger then is, of course, that these new variants, even though so many people have been vaccinated, they might try and bring that back unwittingly, and there could be a real impact then on the UK as well. And there is still this argument about the vaccinations and about getting enough supplies, as well as the argument with the European Union. And the danger is against lifting the lockdown too early. There was a demonstration in London again today against the lockdown. There were a few hundred people, 400 to 500 people were out. There were scuffles with the police, some arrests were made, and it shows the strength of feeling against further lockdown, whereas some of the scientific advisors for the government are saying, look, we need these restrictions to stay in place for some time yet.
OK, Yolo Abdavid, thanks very much indeed for updating us. Well, Germany is also on the brink of imposing more coronavirus restrictions due to an exponential growth in infection numbers there. We can speak to Natalie Carney, who is in Munich for us. So, Natalie, will we see another full national lockdown for Germany?
Well, Germany still is in a relative lockdown at the moment. At the beginning of the month, the government announced partial easing, a very sort of complex, gradual, step-by-step easing of the full lockdown that would lead until March the 28th. The issue is here that could be extended even further, and some of the easing we've seen over the last couple of weeks could even be reversed. The problem is, as you've mentioned, the mounting number of infections, which are predominantly from coronavirus COVID-19 mutations. The country's top virologist has warned that if these precautionary measures are not continued, that we could even be seeing numbers that we saw at Christmas time within a couple of weeks, right after Easter. At Christmas time, Germany was fraught with COVID-19 cases, seeing their highest number of infections and deaths. So it's very concerning for the government and, of course, everybody that's living under the country. Bavaria, where I am right now, is the very first country to go into lockdown exactly 1 year ago today. And it looks like a year on that we could very well be seeing ourselves going into a third lockdown.
At midnight on March 20th, 2020, Bavaria went into lockdown. At the time, 2 months after the country's first infected person was detected in Bavaria, Germany had close to 20,000 positive cases. Borders, schools, and all non-essential shops had been closed, but now Bavaria was telling people to work from home and restricting all unnecessary travel out of the house. Masks, clear shields, and COVID-19 drive-through testing stations sprung up across Bavaria as it became the country's worst-hit state with the strictest coronavirus lockdown measures.
Wir können an der Stelle nicht endlos warten. Wir müssen eine Entscheidung treffen. Eine totale
We cannot wait endlessly. We have to make a decision. A total curfew would mean that you're not allowed to leave the house. We don't really want to lock up the region. We want to give people the opportunity to go out into the fresh air and work. Otherwise, everything collapses.
With borders closed, international students found themselves stuck in Bavarian schools, while Bavarian farmers faced losing the entire year's crops, with seasonal workers banned from entering the country. Despite federal financial support, many companies changed their business models to adapt to these new regulations. Bavaria began reopening schools and shops again in early May as the country's track and trace program helped keep the pandemic under control.
Wir bekommen unsere Informationen vom Gesundheitsamt.
We get our information from the local health authority. They get it from hospitals and doctors. We then find the closest people to the infected person and pass those contacts to the contact tracing team. They get all the people concerned and send them into quarantine.
Die telefonieren dann die ganzen Kontakte.
Things began to normalize until October, when the second wave of COVID-19 infections led Bavaria to reimpose curfews in some districts, making it the first in Germany to go back into lockdown. In early December, Bavaria declared a state of emergency as new daily cases nationwide exceeded 30,000. By Christmas, Germany was facing the highest number of infection and death rates yet, with the country's ICU capacity at critical levels. 2 days later, to the relief of many, Germany's vaccination campaign began, but its rollout has been sluggish at best. After months of lockdown in early March, German leaders agreed to a gradual reopening plan in line with mass testing, allowing shops to partially reopen and children to return to part-time face-to-face schooling. A year on from that first lockdown, Bavaria still finds itself living with restrictions, and indications point towards a return to yet another full lockdown. Roughly half of the state has infection rates over 100 per 100,000 population, meaning any easing must be suspended. And while the country has agreed to measures that would speed up its heavily criticized vaccination rollout, there is a lot of catching up to do against rapidly increasing infection rates.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel, when meeting with the heads of the 16 federal states yesterday, said that the emergency brake should be pulled on all areas with incidence rates higher than 100. That is at least half of the districts within Bavaria itself. So this can again reverse some of the easing we have seen over the last couple of weeks. In response to the vaccine rollout, the government is also now going to start allowing family practitioners to administer the jab right after Easter in an attempt to try to speed up what has been heavily criticized as a very sluggish vaccine rollout.
Natalie Carney in Munich, many thanks. The European Commission is threatening to ban exports of the AstraZeneca vaccine if the bloc does not receive its promised deliveries first. President Ursula von der Leyen has warned the drug maker to fulfill its contract with the EU before delivering to other countries. She says the EU has been exporting doses of the vaccine manufactured in Belgium and the Netherlands to the UK, but has not received any back from British factories where it's also being produced. Europe is pushing to get its vaccination drive back on track after EU and British regulators said the benefits of AstraZeneca's shot outweighed any risks. The jab was suspended for a week over concerns of blood clotting. For more on this, I'm joined now by Mohammed Munir, who's a lecturer in molecular virology at Lancaster University. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme today. So, the European Medicines Agency has given the AstraZeneca jab the green light for use in Europe. What do you see happening now with the rollout?
Well, it's good news that European Medicines Agency and World Health Organization are backing up the idea of carry on rolling out this vaccine, because there is no apparent strong link between the blood clots and the AstraZeneca vaccine itself. However, I think because of this 1 to 1.5 week suspension, I think the dent has already been made and the trust within the community is really low. I mean, if the survey that has been conducted in France indicates that only 20% of the French people would like to take AstraZeneca vaccine compared to 52% for the Pfizer vaccine. So I think the real challenge from here onward is to rebuild that the confidence, because European Medicines Agency can break the link or establish the link between the blood clot and the vaccine itself, but they cannot enforce any country to start the vaccine. So that is down to the each country to take up and start rolling out the vaccine.
So you say that trust is really low. What impact has the suspensions had on how the public sees all of the vaccines, those including AstraZeneca and the others?
Well, that is actually equally applicable for all of the vaccines, because if the confidence is low on one vaccine, it always raises question for the second vaccine. But particularly speaking on to the AstraZeneca vaccine, because it is based on a very traditional old technology. If you remember from the beginning, it has several mistakes for the dosing. It has 2 pauses during the trial, phase 3 trial. And all of those procedures have been rectified, clarified, that there is no side effect associated with the AstraZeneca vaccine. But still, again, because of its old technology and because of probably other political reasons, the more vaccine hesitancy is toward the AstraZeneca vaccine than Pfizer or Moderna or Novavax would be.
So how much of the population in Europe has been adversely affected by the failure to administer this vaccine?
Well, one thing, Robin, is very clear that the day we don't vaccinate, we are giving the virus to, in fact, the chance to infect more population, and more infected population mean higher the death rate. And if we look onto the number, we know that 90% of deaths, unfortunately, come into the cohort of people from 60 to 60 years above. And if we look onto the number of people who have been vaccinated in Europe, they are hardly above 80 years old. So that means 62 up to 80 years old people are still vulnerable and they are not yet vaccinated. And if the new variant or the third wave start to come at the level it has been before, I think it's going to impact quite heavily onto the Europe, because vulnerable community is still not yet vaccinated.
Okay, Mohammed Munir from Lancaster University, thanks very much indeed for joining us today. The chief epidemiologist of the Chinese Center for Disease Control says the campaign to donate vaccines to developing countries should initially target older people. He was speaking at the China Development Forum, a major business event in the country.
We should have a priority list among different countries. In particular, if a country has a high percentage of aging population, they should be vaccinated first.
Here in the UK, patients suffering long-term effects from COVID-19 are being taught breathing techniques by singing teachers. A unique trial run by the English National Opera is being rolled out across the UK to help people with so-called long COVID. Nicole Johnston has more from London.
First, the warm-up. And then singing. Shamira Farshid is trying to recover from COVID-19 after she caught the disease 1 year ago.
One night, actually, I did write my will in case something happens to me, because I really couldn't breathe that night.
Shamira is an estimated one of 300,000 people in the UK suffering from long COVID, where symptoms of the disease linger for months. But with online breathing classes run by the English National Opera, she says she's finally improving.
My lung is improving now, I think. Actually, for last 3 weeks, I didn't lose inhaler even once.
This is the English National Opera before the pandemic struck. With the Opera House now closed, it's finding a new purpose, teaming up with the UK's health service to help up to 1,000 people suffering from long COVID manage their breathlessness and anxiety.
As doctors started to talk to us about those long COVID symptoms, it became clear to us quite early on that possibly we might have a useful skill set to offer to that problem.
In the first trial, 90% of people who took part said the techniques had helped them.
When you pare opera as an art form back, it's rooted in breath. And as a company, we have a deep understanding of the physiology of breathing and breath control. And for singers and vocal specialists, they have to be very skilled at filling buildings with their voices and often filling buildings with their voices totally unamplified.
Before starting the singing program, Shamira says she couldn't walk for longer than half an hour before running out of breath. Now she can take a stroll for up to an hour and a half.
I couldn't lie down on my back. As soon as I was lying down on my back, I couldn't breathe at all. I had to sit. So now it's much, much better.
Sail, baby. So with gentle, soothing music, even lullabies, long COVID sufferers are being supported on their long journey back to health.
Go to sleep.
Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
Still ahead here on The World Today. We're in Anchorage in Alaska, where talks between the world's two largest economies have come to a close.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. We bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
Patient after patient after patient. They take a long time to get better. They're the sickest patients we've ever seen.
It's a race against time because we can all see the threat that our NHS faces, the pressure it's under.
We're dealing with something we knew very little about.
Europe's first two epicentres in February have received their first dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine.
Another day, another grim milestone for the UK in its fight against COVID-19. 100,000 people have now lost their lives after contracting the virus.
Welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Fears of a third wave in Europe. France and Poland go back into lockdown as the vaccine row intensifies. And Germany could be next to impose more restrictions after warning the disease is growing exponentially across the country. Chinese and US officials have wrapped up high-level talks in Alaska. It was the first major summit between Beijing and the Biden administration. Mark New has the details from Anchorage.
After two opening day sessions filled with fiery exchanges on Thursday, the delegations returned Friday morning ready to get down to business. CPC Politburo member Yang Jiechi and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi resumed talks with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Like their previous days, this behind-closed-door session overran its expected time, lasting more than 3 hours.
This time, strategic dialogue was direct, frank, and constructive. It is very conducive to relations between the two sides. But there are so many major differences sitting between the two sides. China is going to safeguard our national sovereignty, security, and our interest to develop. The development of China is an irreversible trend.
After the meeting, Blinken said they knew going in there would be a number of areas where they'd be at odds with China's actions in Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Tibet, Taiwan, and cyberspace.
It's no surprise that when we raised those issues, clearly and directly, we got a defensive response. But we were also able to have a very candid conversation over these many hours on an expansive agenda. On Iran, on North Korea, on Afghanistan, on climate. Our interests intersect.
Yang brought up the call between Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Joe Biden several weeks after his election as an example of enhancing communication and dialogue. Wang also expressed his hopes of finding more common ground.
We're clear about the standards for the China-U.S. relations. We hope that moving forward, China and the U.S. should move towards each other while respecting each other's co-interests. On this common ground, China is willing to adopt an open attitude to the United States.
We were clear-eyed coming in, we're clear-eyed coming out, and we will go back to Washington to take stock of where we are. We'll continue to consult with allies and partners on the way forward. And of course, on issues ranging from Iran to Afghanistan, through the normal diplomatic channels, we'll continue to work with China going forward.
U.S. Secretary of State Blinken says they told the Chinese side regarding economics, trade, and technology they were reviewing those issues in close consultation with the U.S. Congress, partners, and allies. They said they'd move forward on those issues in a way that protects and advances the interests of workers and their companies. Mark New, CGTN, Anchorage, Alaska.
Let's take a brief look now at some other stories from around the world. A volcano in Iceland has erupted around 30 kilometers southwest of the capital Reykjavik. Aerial footage shows lava spewing out in the hours after the explosion, covering an area the size of 200 football fields. The Meteorological Office says the eruption posed no immediate danger and has been classified as small. Iceland has recorded more than 40,000 earthquakes in the past 3 weeks. Turkey has pulled out of the world's first binding treaty protecting women from violence. The 2011 Istanbul Convention, signed by 45 countries and the European Union, requires governments to adopt legislation prosecuting domestic violence and similar abuse. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan pulled out of the treaty by presidential decree. The UN warns that people in Mozambique, uprooted by a jihadist insurgency, risk becoming radicalized themselves. More than 700,000 people have fled their homes in the last year due to increased attacks by fighters linked to Islamic State. A 7.2 magnitude earthquake hit northeast Japan on Saturday, shaking buildings and generating a 1-meter tsunami wave. Experts say the affected area was the same one devastated 10 years ago by the 2011 quake and tsunami. So far, there have been no reports of deaths or injuries. International spectators will not be allowed to enter Japan for this summer's Olympic Games. Organisers say they took the decision due to public concern over coronavirus. Around 600,000 Olympic tickets will be refunded, along with 300,000 Paralympic tickets. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has tested positive for COVID-19 2 days after getting his first vaccination. According to a tweet by the health minister, the 68-year-old is self-isolating at home. It's estimated around 4 million migrant workers in Thailand come from neighbouring Myanmar. They often send money home each month to help support their relatives. But the coronavirus pandemic, coupled with Myanmar's military takeover, has left many families struggling to survive. Our correspondent, Desita Sauka, reports.
When a virus spreads, so does hardship. But combine that with this.
and the hardship becomes unimaginable. The life of a migrant worker in Thailand was never easy, but to some extent, it was better than the life they were living in Myanmar. Joy crossed the porous border 5 years ago in search of a future that could support her family. She did, teaching migrant children. She was able to send a third of her income back home every month without fail. That was until last month.
Even if we can send money from here, the money won't go to Myanmar. If I can't send money back home, it will be very difficult for my family. My dad and my aunt are old. They need money for food, hospital, and medicine.
Before the pandemic, her siblings would pitch in. Not anymore. Employment dried up. Joy is now single-handedly supporting her family of 9. She has resorted to using a broker with exorbitant interest rates to make cash runs to the sealed-off border. Risky for the broker, risky for her. But for Joy and the estimated 4 million migrant workers in Thailand, there's just no other option.
Here in Thailand, economic opportunities are greater, wages are higher, and there's more demand for less skilled labor, all acting as pull factors for migrant workers. They are considered the breadwinners of their families and send money home every month. But this past year has been tough, and the military takeover has cut a vital lifeline that many migrant families depend on.
Remittance services and banks have been heavily disrupted. ATMs not working, bank branches closed. Those that remain open have imposed limits on daily withdrawals. The effects are painful, not only for the more than 2 million vulnerable families in Myanmar that rely on remittances to get by, but also for the migrant workers in Thailand already struggling to make ends meet.
9% out of 10 that we interviewed basically mentioned they were not able to send remittances back home or had to largely reduce the amount that they were sending back home.
The human scale is immense. They simply cannot sustain their families' livelihoods. But the drop in remittances will also dramatically impact the country's growth.
Migrant workers in Thailand sent annually around $2.8 billion of formal remittances. This represents a very important contribution to this country's GDP. The percentage, if we look at them for Myanmar, it's 4.3% of their GDP that rely on remittances.
It's a country that depends on remittances, and millions of its people now hidden victims of an economy in crisis. Lucita Sao-Kao, CGTN, Samut Sakhon, Thailand.
A final look at our top story. France, Poland and Ukraine have started new lockdowns, with 20 European nations reporting a rise in positive tests. Speaking in the last hour, UK Health Secretary Matt Hancock said the country's vaccination programme was on track, but the government was maintaining a cautious approach.
Of course, we're absolutely vigilant, but there is no sign that we won't be able to make progress as set out in the roadmap. Here, thankfully, the number of deaths is falling very, very fast. We're on track to meet the commitments we've made to vaccinate the whole population, offer that first jab by the end of July, and to meet the dates set out in the roadmap, but we'll stay vigilant and we'll be cautious and careful in our approach.
In a moment, my colleague Stephen Cole will be here with the agenda. In this week's show, he's asking whether cryptocurrencies are the future of money or a volatile bubble about to pop. That's the agenda with Stephen Cole right after the World Today at 16:30 GMT here on CGTN. Well, that's it for the World Today. Thanks very much for watching. We're available on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well, of course, as on the CGTN app and CGTN.com. From all the team here in London, it's goodbye.